I'll bet you're not going to recognize these nightstands once you see the after. Here's how I updated these salvaged nightstands using a one-colored stencil design. Just let me get set up and I'll be right back.
Let's start. Here's the fun part.
Here's the Restore nightstand set I started with. To me, they looked like a blank canvas, but they were really short. So I actually posted them on Facebook asking people's opinions. I got about a 50-50 mix, but I'm so happy that I picked them up. Once I brought them home and brought them down to my paint room, I gave them a really good once-over, and they were in really good shape. Not bad at all. They had a few scratches on the top. The drawers were old school wood sliders, but all the drawers slid in and out really smoothly. Time to get to work and see what we can do. I used a heat gun to remove the price tags and the tape, which works effortlessly if you have any really stuck-on stickers or anything adhesive. I went ahead and removed the drawers, thinking that I was going to have to number them on the back, but they already had numbers on them. Bonus, one less thing for me to do. Working with a 2-drawer nightstand isn't a big deal, but when I'm working on, say, a 9-drawer dresser or a 5-drawer tall boy, and it's an older piece of furniture, I always like numbering the back because often specific drawers will only fit into specific slots. And I've had many times where I have fiddled with them for far too long than I needed to. So I'm just in the habit of numbering the back of the drawers all the time. It's a time saver and makes things so much easier. While I was removing the drawers, I noticed that a few of the bottoms were kind of loosey-goosey. So I went ahead and grabbed some trim nails, my dad's old hammer, and I went ahead and added some trim nails around the perimeter just to tighten everything up. Now it was time for super good cleaning. I had my white lightning in my spray bottle and I have a large automotive sponge. So I just sprayed them down inside and out and gave them a really good cleaning. Once the nightstands had dried, I brought it into my sanding room to give them a scuff sanding with a 120 grit sandpaper and my Bosch sander. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who chimed in on my new workspace post and recommended me to leave the sanding room floor as is. I do agree it is such a durable floor, even though it's not pretty. But this floor will probably outlast me, so I'm taking all your advice and I'm just going to leave it as is for the time being. If you missed the post on my new workspace, I'll be sure to add it in the links down below. Also, here I'm demoing how versatile this sander is. It's a workhorse. I love this sander. And you can even get into more detailed areas like the lip handle on these nightstands. Here you can see where I'm just getting right into that groove just by using the edge of the sander. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that it's 25% off as of publishing this post. So I'll also leave the link in the description down below, and it's also on the website if you're at all interested or in the market for a new sander. I highly recommend this one, and it is a very good price. And just in case you're wondering, I'm not sponsored by Bosch, although Bosch, if you're listening, I would love to be. After everything was scuff sanded, I took my dollar store brush and wiped off the excess dust. Now it was on to sanding the body of these nightstands, and I just went ahead and sanded the top. There was a few little nooks and scratches that needed sanding out from the top of these nightstands, but nothing really big, large at all. So I had these nightstands scuff sanded probably, I don't know, with the drawers and the body all under 5 or 6 minutes, I would say. On the edges, the round curved edges of these nightstands, as you can see, I used the edge of the sander again to get right into that crevice. And then I used a sanding sponge to sand and scuff sand the curve. I cleaned off all the dust, brought everything back into my painting room, and here I set up my bonding boss. I've been brushing it on to the last few projects, but I decided to roll it on to these nightstands. And here's a quick tip to keep your paint tray nice and clean so you don't have to clean up too much. This is so easy. I just line it with a plastic bag, and these are the plastic bags that I get at the grocery store when I'm, putting my produce into it, my apples or my oranges. These are those little thin, skinny bags that never open. You know how you rip them off the roll at the grocery store, and then you probably spend 2 minutes trying to open them up just to put some produce in them. But they work awesome for the paint tray. So I just line the paint tray with it. I put the primer, in this case, just right on the bag, and I roll it that way. And I have to say, I am really impressed with how it rolled on. I'm just actually really impressed with this primer in general. I didn't think I was going to find something that I enjoyed working with as much as the BIN shellac-based primer. But this has no odor. And it does take a little longer because it requires 2 coats and then you wait 24 hours before you paint over it. But it really adheres. It cuts out the odors, it cuts out the tannins, the bleed through, it primes really well, and it adheres really well. And so far, I am really impressed. I did end up grabbing a cheap chip brush, and I just got into the nooks and crannies that my roller didn't get into quite right. I found that there was a little bit of buildup of the primer when I used the tip of my roller to get in there. I do that with the BIN shellac-based primer because it's very, very thin. But this primer is a little thicker, so it pooled up a little bit in the corners, so a chip brush just alleviated that. The average modern height for nightstands is between 24 and 28 inches. And this nightstand set, they were shorties standing at 20 inches. So to add some height to these nightstands, I reinforced the base so I could attach some new legs. I started by measuring to see what size of board or piece of wood I would need to cut down to reinforce. Then I noticed they had nailed in these little wood stoppers on the bottom. And this took me so long. This took me longer than actually cutting and inserting the pieces because, I was having a hard time getting them off. I tried using a little chisel to cut it down a little bit, and because I didn't want to make a mess of my primer paint job already, right? So it had already dried, and I used the chisel kind of to cut into the primer and into the creases of these little feet, and then I used my anvil tool, and I tried prying it off that way. It was pretty tedious, but I did get it done. Once I had that all finished up, I grabbed a couple of salvaged boards. I measured everything out, and using my miter saw, I cut the boards to size. I continued to do that with 3 more boards. Before gluing them in, I made sure that it was a really snug fit, and then I took some wood glue and applied it onto the inside of the body and also along the board. I maneuvered the board back into place, and using a mallet hammer, I hammered it into position. Because it fits so tightly, it took me a little minute. Once I had it in there pretty darn good, I also took a level and made sure it was 100% flush and level. Then I went ahead and clamped it in place. I did the exact same thing for the other side of the nightstand and continued to do the same for the other nightstand as well. Now for the fun part. Let's put some design onto the front of these drawers. I took out some black Dixie Belle mud and a Greek Key Stencil. I gave the mud a really good stir before I started using it. I grabbed a drawer and secured this stencil on by using some painter's tape. This is a pretty large stencil, so a good portion of the stencil was hanging over. I didn't really like the way it was laying on this single drawer, and I found it much easier to put the 2 drawers together, which you'll see in a bit. Because this stencil is so large and it was kind of laying over the side, I had to use a toothpick to clean up some of the design. So to keep things a little cleaner, I ended up taping 2 drawers together, and the painter's tape really helped them stay flush. Then I went ahead and laid this stencil on top of the 2 drawers. Because the stencil fits so much better on the project using the 2 drawers, it was so much easier to create this raised stencil design. I just took the mud and it was like icing. I just iced it. I don't know how else to explain it. It's pretty darn fun though. I will say that once you have some of the mud smeared on to this stencil design, it holds it down. So you don't really need a whole lot of tape or adhesive to keep the stencil down. If it's laying nice and flat, once you start doing the raised stencil technique, that, like I said, the mud or the wood filler or whatever sort of paste you're using to create the raised design, it'll hold that stencil down. So it gets easier the more you apply. And here's where the magic happens. I always have so much fun with this. Check this out as I'm pulling the stencil up. You may notice a few areas are a little heavy. They're not perfect, but no worries. You just take a toothpick or something that fits in there nicely and you can correct it, no problem. Also, because the 2 drawers were together so tightly, I actually took an X-Acto knife and just ran it right down the center so it divided the design up nicely. So in a perfect world, our stencils would fit every project we did, but unfortunately that's not the case. So what I did was I left the stencil and the drawers to dry overnight, and I came back the next morning to match up my stencil design because there was the end of the drawer that still needed the design on it. And I find it so much easier to match up a stencil design, a raised stencil design. When you're painting, if you use very little paint and you're using a dry brush, you can match it up while it's still, because it dries so fast, right? But raised stencil takes a while to dry. So I find it so much easier to let it dry 100% and then come back and match the stencil up. It's such a cleaner look. While I left the rest of the raised stencil to dry, it was time to start painting. And I used my 2-inch short brush and a paint color called Anchor Silk all-in-one mineral paint. And this is a real black. This is a true black, which I thought would look great to give these nightstands a more modern look. This paint is awesome at self-leveling, and there's about a 5-minute open window time with it. So here you see I'm just kind of putting it on any which way. And what I do is I like putting on the paint, getting it all over the area I'm working in, and I do work in sections. And then what I do is once I have an ample amount of paint on it and I know there's going to be full coverage, then I go in with my brush and I smooth everything out. And this creates a super smooth paint finish, even though when I'm applying it at first, it might not look like it. When painting edges, I always come at the edges on an angle to make sure that it doesn't make a mess on the edge. Then I'll go back in and smooth it out. Just look at how beautiful this paint applies. And I know I say it so much, but I'm always amazed at what paint can do. It just totally transforms the look of a piece of furniture or the ambiance in a room. It really makes such a difference. And it's the quickest and easy way to make such a huge impact. Painting the top of this nightstand, I use the exact same method. Make sure to get the paint on, make sure there's full coverage. I just go in kind of willy-nilly, and then once all my paint is on, I go back and I smooth everything out 100%, and then I do not touch it because it self-levels beautifully. To clean all the black paint out of this paintbrush, I use the Scrubby soap, which I love. This is so easy to use because it has like a scrubby sort of sponge on it, and the soap is inside, so it cleans the paintbrushes really nicely. It also cleans my new paint sink really nicely. I'm trying to keep everything so nice and clean. So here's a look at the first coat of Anchor on the nightstands. They did require 2 coats for full coverage. I bought these furniture legs off Amazon and I went ahead and installed them. Now that this set, the body was totally finished with new legs, 2 coats of paint, it was time to focus on the drawers. And to start painting the drawers, before I did so, I went in with a sanding sponge and just knocked off any of that mud that was slightly hanging over the sides or that have gotten on the lip of the drawer. And I gave the raised stencil a very, very light sanding just to smooth it out. Then I came in with my shop vac and made sure I sucked up all that dust. I painted the drawers in 2 coats of Anchor, but because the raised stencil is raised, I needed to pounce the brush to make sure to get into all those nooks and crannies because you don't want to miss anything. So for this method, a good solid paintbrush would be needed. If it's a cheapo brush, you might be losing some bristles because I really pounce the whole drawer. And then once I got in there with all the paint, then I would go in and I would smooth it out so it has a nice smooth finish. And I have to admit, once this black paint started going on to this raised stencil, I love it. I think it looks awesome. I continued with all 4 drawers, and these took 2 coats of Anchor as well. Now I could have stopped there because it looked pretty darn good, but I added a little extra something. Now the Silk All-in-One mineral paint is just that. It's all in one. It does not require a top coat. But to highlight that Greek Key stencil design, what I did was I took a brush and I just put very little clear coat on the tips of it. And this is a high gloss clear coat I used. And what I did was I gently brushed over the raised stencil area, and this was just to highlight the stenciling. I had never done this before, but I'm so glad I tried it because in my opinion, it highlights this stencil beautifully. When the light hits it just right, it looks great. So here's a reminder of what we started with. And here's the after. And I have to say, I am tickled pink with the way this turned out. These nightstands look so much more modern, and it doesn't even look like the same nightstands to me. I wouldn't recognize them anyways, and I cannot wait to hear what you think. I hope you enjoyed today's video and it's inspired you to try something different with your furniture makeovers. If so, please give it a like. Feel free to subscribe. And you can also find me over at salvagedinspirations.com, where I have over 500 furniture painting tutorials teaching you how to make your furniture beautiful. Until next time, have a fabulous week, and thanks so much for joining me. Bye, guys.